Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. This lecture will be for Wednesday, May 6th. Um, let's see, what do we have going on? So, Monday, you guys did the Saving Private Ryan video. Tuesday was the first day of the lecture. Today will be the second part of the lecture. We're looking at a test by next Tuesday. That was in the plan that I put up on Google Classroom. We have our Zoom meetings today, which is Tuesday. Please check on your classrooms to see the time and the links. Please be there. I want to see you guys. I want to hear you guys. I want to talk to you, see what you have going on and what you're thinking about what's going on out there. We have our Twitter president persuasion assignment for Friday. Email me with any questions on that. 280 characters. Make me feel better. Reassure me as an American that we are going to get through this crisis. That is your job. Now, we would be remiss to do World War II without maps. I should have had maps available to us in the first lecture. So let's kind of go over the territories here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this from Global 10, but let's go through this. So I just picked up the Google map of the world here, and I'll use my cursor to kind of show you different things. So obviously Germany is right here, front and center in Europe. Their borders had been made smaller as a result of World War I. Okay. Remember, at a certain point, the Germanic empires stretched this way, stretched this way, stretched this way, and over time, it got smaller and smaller. And then after World War I, it got even smaller. So the idea that Hitler was going to return them to an empire is not exactly so foreign from their history, because they did have the Germanic kingdoms and the Habsburg Empire way back when. So it's there, it's in the lineage, it's in the culture already. We have England up here. We have France right here. We have Spain. We have Italy. Many of these countries in here were created in after World War I. If you remember, part of Wilson's 14 points was self-determination, that nations would decide for themselves what their government would be. And in a lot of these countries, you had a shared ethnicity that didn't really like each other. So after World War I, they decided to draw more lines on the map and make them into smaller countries where they could celebrate their own ethnicities without having some sort of problem within their government or within their culture. All right, we have Poland here, and then we have Russia over here. All right, so this is a fascist state, Hitler. This is a fascist state, Mussolini. This is a fascist state, Spain. Okay, this is a democracy. This is a democracy. These are democracies here. And you kind of have a mixed bag in here. These are relatively new and war-torn countries, poorer countries. You have communism that is coming alive in these areas here, especially because of the Great Depression. And again, that was one of the reasons that Hitler used to start to push out against communism in this and this direction. Okay, so 1936, he's going to start with the Rhineland, and the Rhineland is the Alsace-Lorraine region, which is right here on this border. Now, he's not allowed to build up his military. He's not allowed to take this territory, but he is returning Germany to its former greatness. So there are German-speaking ethnic people here. He's going to push in. All right, Austria is here, 1938. Sudetenland, you can see that that Czechia, or the Czech Republic, pushes into Germany. This Sudetenland, which was taken away from the Germans and given to this country after World War I, is going to be returned in 1938. As Germany says, we have German people speaking here. We're taking that territory back. Okay? Now, by 1940, all right, already invaded through Poland. They were supposed to meet in the middle with the Russians. Remember, Poland was another country that was created after World War I. So these are new countries. All right? He's going to push into Poland. Russia's going to come through the other side, and then eventually he's going to attack Russia, which is probably the worst decision that Hitler makes, because it winds up meaning that he has to fight a two-front war with the Russians on one side, the British on the other, the French here, and then eventually the Americans coming over. By 1940, he has taken Austria, Czech Republic, Poland, moved up here into Denmark and these areas in the Scandinavian countries. He's taken the Netherlands, he's taken Belgium, he's taken Luxembourg, and he's cut off the north of France on a line like this, all right, where he controls Paris. So German forces is all through here, all through here, and all through here, and he's got a ally in Italy on the southern end, and also Spain to a lesser degree on this end. So to say that England was the last man standing, I mean, that's it. Okay, let's move over here. Like, this is it for democracy in this part of Europe. And then, of course, next over here is going to be the United States. So let's go take a look at the Asian side of this thing. All right. So we have Japan here. All right. Which is an island east of the Korean Peninsula, north and east of China. Beijing is here, is the capital of China. Japan is small, China is big, and they are looking, Japan, now remember, Japan went modern and China did not, so Japan starts to rise as an economy and rise as a power. They are looking to dominate this part of the world, okay? These islands in here and China, they say that this is theirs, all right? And this is going to be their realm. Now, if we think about where Hawaii and Pearl Harbor is, here's California. The Hawaiian Islands are right here, okay? And the U.S. has a huge portion of their Navy here. So if there is a threat to Japanese dominance of this region, it is going to be the American naval presence at Hawaii, which, if you remember, is why we wanted, or part of the reason why we wanted Hawaii in the first place. So let's zoom in here. All right, it's about I think it's about a 5-hour flight from LA to get here, and based on this distance, I'm gonna say probably about a 8 or 10-hour flight to get from Hawaii to Japan. So it's actually, it's not halfway between, but it's pretty close. All right, now America at this point in time, pre-Pearl Harbor, 1941, we have escalated our involvement in the war in sense of we are now lending and leasing to Britain and France and, any of their friends that would fight against Nazi forces or fascist forces in Europe. We are also aiding the Russians at this point. So we go from neutrality to we'll sell you non-military goods to we'll trade military goods and weapons. Now, America is the top producing country in the world. And if you think about it, we helped prop up these other countries in the hopes that we wouldn't have to send troops and get involved. We were hoping that weapons would be enough. But as things move forward, we're quickly realizing that that's not going to be the case. So the linchpin here is, yes, the proximity to Japan, and yes, the fact that we have a very powerful Navy here that could interfere with Japanese movement in this area. But the big thing is going to be when we stop selling them oil. When you stop selling a war power oil, it can grind their war effort to a halt. So that is going to be looked at as an act of aggression, and the Japanese are going to believe that their hand was forced in attacking us. So let's get back to our PowerPoint here. So Pearl Harbor, we've all heard of it. I've actually been there. It's on the island of Oahu, where Honolulu is. And I was there, I think, in the summer, excuse me, after my 5th grade year. And I guess I'm 10 years old or 11 years old at that time. And I definitely remember the gravity of it, the somberness of it, the sadness that was there. And I was there, I guess that would be in the early 90s. So about 50 years after this happened. There are a few events in American history where people will always remember where they are. For people that were alive in America during this time period, it's definitely Pearl Harbor. For people, now my parents are born right around the time of Pearl Harbor, a year and a couple of years after that. So they don't remember that, obviously, because they weren't there. For them, it was the JFK assassination. For me, it was 9/11. All right, the thing that happened that you'll never remember, that one cataclysmic event where you'll never forget where you were. Now, the current situation with COVID-19, that's not a one-day situation. That's a very different experience that, will be processed differently than a one-day kind of shock to the system. So December 7th, 1941, FDR says the day that will live in infamy. Japanese planes launched from aircraft carriers are going to bomb the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. We do intercept a message saying that assault in the Pacific is imminent, but no one knows where. It happens in the very, very early parts of the morning. So the radar does pick up, and the movie clip actually shows that the radar does pick up a bunch of planes flying into the Hawaiian airspace. But the person that's sitting there believes that it's just resupply and that it's not any sort of enemy attack that's coming. All right. Now, this is the first attack by a foreign power on U.S. soil since the War of 1812, which, if you remember, was Britain, the basically War of Revolution Part 2. Complete and devastating surprise. Few hours, they killed 2,000 American servicemen, 187 aircraft, 18 naval vessels, including 8 battleships. So it's a it is a complete military strike on a naval base. It is not a civilian-based strike where they're killing innocent people. It was trying to take out our Navy. By a stroke of luck, there were no aircraft carriers there. Now, aircraft carriers are used to move planes around the world. And if there had been aircraft carriers there, you're not building one of those overnight. You can build planes and vessels relatively quickly, but building an aircraft carrier is very difficult and it's going to take a lot longer of time. So you're not able to do that. And that would have really, really prohibited America's ability to mobilize troops and move their people around the world. So that's just a stroke of luck that there were none there. The U.S. declared war on Japan, and as a result of their Axis alliance, Germany then declared war on U.S. The battle lines are now drawn, and we have now been officially dragged into this war with our military. All right. Now, we don't get into Europe in numbers until the D-Day invasion, which you watched on Monday as part of the Normandy invasion of France, okay? But starting in early 1942, because Pearl Harbor happens at the end of 41, we will be involved heavily in the Pacific War. So I'm going to flip back and forth to the map here a little bit. Now, World War II is often called the Gross National Product War, and what that means is gross national product or gross domestic product are economic measures of production. So how much can you produce? The country that can produce the most will win the war. Now, we are very well situated for that because we've already had decades of practice being an industrial power. And really, the fighting is not going on in America. So our factories are not going to get blown up. We're going to be able to build weapons and ships and planes and tanks without any sort of interruption. So we will be able to outproduce everybody else. Russia's taking it hard on their Western Front from Nazi forces. Britain is decimated. France is decimated. We're really the only answer in terms of making product. All right. Now, the first few months of this war are not good. Japan is a fierce enemy. All right. And Japanese culture is about honor, especially their military culture. That's kind of that samurai culture that then moved into the ethos of their military. It was you win or you go home dead. Those were their options. That was what their culture told them was right. Okay. So Japan is doing what Germany did. They are retaking back things that they see as theirs. They are dominating inferior people, and that's just the way it was. They were modern. They were going to take over, and they believed that they were doing God's work. Now, first few months of American involvement is not good. We're going to have many losses. Japan continues to conquer Asia and the Pacific, so they continue to move through Asian countries. They get to the Philippines, and they force 78,000 American and Filipino troops to surrender, the largest in American military history, and that was the Bataan Death March, where I forget where they were marching them from and to, but the treatment of them and the starvation and the disease that took place got picked up in the American media and really, really turned Americans against Asians in general, but the Japanese specifically. And all sorts of Asian stereotypes started in this country about what kind of people they were and how inferior they were to white Christian people. Now, you do have some German involvement in the Atlantic theater. So the Germans sank hundreds of Allied merchant and naval vessels in the battles of the Atlantic. So there you have some naval warfare going on with the Germans, but for the most part, your ground troops and your Navy involvement is going to be in the Pacific. Now, the whole idea here is island. Where am I? Here's my map. Is island hopping. All right. So let's see if we can zero in. Yeah, you see, as I zero in there, we have a lot more of these little islands that are popping up. All right. So you have Australia here. Australia is Britishly held with British heritage. So that's a friendly, and we are going to launch our Pacific Island campaigns from Australia. So we have a base there to be able to do it. Now, if you think about it, Japan didn't get there fast enough. They have to assume that nobody can predict the future, but they have to assume that if America is going to get involved, then they are going to launch from Australia. So Japan is heading in a southward direction, right? Philippines are here. Japan is up here. They are moving this way, and they are moving this way to try to preempt America from being able to get involved. They think that they're going to be able to take out more of the American naval presence and America in general in their attack on Pearl Harbor. They underestimated that. So we are going to begin a campaign of pushing them in this direction, back north. And we are going to launch from Australia, and it's going to be called an island hopping campaign, where you go from one island to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And in a series of very, very difficult battles, the Japanese retreat, they pick up and move to the next island, and then you ramp up and attack that island. So you're talking about jungle fighting in a lot of these states, these islands. We did not know the terrain. We were not used to fighting that kind of war. And it is going to be gruesome. There will be many, many deaths as a result of this island hopping campaign, but it's inch by inch, mile by mile, island by island, as we try to push them back into their own country. Okay, so it's sort of a battle of attrition. How many men, how many weapons can you throw at this war? And if we can outproduce them and outman them, then we can basically kill enough of them to be able to take that territory and then fight another day in another area. All right. So some of the main battles, and none of this will ever be asked on, not that you're taking a Regents, but none of this will ever be asked on a final or a Regents. So May of 1942, we have the Battle of Coral Sea. The American Navy turned back the Japanese fleet that wanted to attack Australia. June of 1942, they win the Battle of Midway Island. The victories allowed American forces' island hopping campaign, one bloody battle at a time, getting our forces closer to Japan. And by the time the war is drawing to a close, the war in Europe ends before the war in the Pacific. And this island hopping campaign, we get to a point where next up would be invasion of Japan. And an invasion of Japan would have meant hundreds of thousands, if not more American civilian deaths. And that's when Harry Truman is going to have the very, very difficult decision to make as to whether or not he should drop this new weapon, this atomic bomb, on the Japanese rather than invade their mainland and suffer many more American casualties. So things are getting better in the Pacific. We're starting to win. About a year and a half into our involvement, we start to turn the tide on them, and we're able to start pushing. So if you look, let's see if I can. I guess I can't. Yeah, let's just go back to this. Okay, so you can see some of the islands here. You have Pearl Harbor over here. You have Iwo Jima here. You have Okinawa here. You have Guadalcanal, which was a very, very nasty battle here. This purple that you see is the Japanese little empire that they've kind of taken over. And if you look, they are right there at the tip of Australia. Okay, Coral Sea is here, and Midway is up here. All right, so we are island hopping with our Navy and also being able to drop troops on these islands to fight ground battles with the Japanese. Now, in Europe, by November of 1942, British and American forces invaded northern Africa, defeating General Erwin Rommel. So, as a launching off point for the Germans, they had Italy and their friend in Mussolini to be able to go into northern Africa and start to push that way. We then are going to start in northern Africa, and we're going to have a similar philosophy in the sense of we're going to push Italy back up into Italy towards Rome. Let me get over there. All right, so if you look at this here, right, you have Italy as our boot, that's Sicily down here, and here is Africa right across the Mediterranean. So we are going to launch into Africa and defeat Rommel, who's a German commander, start pushing them back up this way, and then we can start launching into Italy and going this way up through Italy towards Rome. So we have a similar south to north trajectory when it comes to the Italian peninsula as we did in Japan. So spring of 1943, the Allies gained the upper hand in the Atlantic. American troops were more in the Pacific than in Europe. We were waiting to invade mainland Europe. July of 43, American-British forces invade Sicily and begin the liberation of Italy. There's a popular uprising in Rome overthrowing Mussolini. So the Italians are going to fall relatively quickly. With British forces, we are going to take back northern Africa, jump into Sicily, and then start to push up into Italy and get to the fall of Rome. Mussolini's gone. Italy falls quickly, and we're able to take back Italy for our side. Now, what the big question is what can we do up here? All right, this is the German stronghold here, and this is where England is going to need protection. So we are going to launch the D-Day offensive, which was 200,000 men in the initial wave. That's what you guys watched in Saving Private Ryan, followed by 1 million more coming in after that. They controlled this whole beach. All right, so there was no easy way. You can't just airlift everybody in over them. You're going to have to puncture through this wall, if you will, of machine guns and German men right here, okay? And they're going to launch an offensive across the English Channel, 200,000 men, the D-Day invasion. I think it's June 6, 1944. And that is the scene that you watch. Those boats that are coming up on the shores, those are our boats launching the men in that D-Day invasion across the English Channel. All right. So let's see. American, British, and Canadian soldiers are involved under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, landing in Normandy, northwestern France, June 6, 1944. And they attacked along that beach. They named the different beaches after different sectors of our country. They used names from our country to name different parts of that beach. More than 1 million troops followed them ashore in the next few weeks. It's the most massive sea-land operation in history. After the fierce fighting which you witnessed, German armies retreated eastward. By August, Paris had been liberated. So if we go back to our map, we are, same idea, going to walk the German forces this way and this way back into Germany and meet in Berlin. Now, Russia is being fought by the Germans on this side on an eastern front. So what happens is when you're fighting western and eastern front, you are in effect splitting the German resources, army, money, leaders in half. Half of them need to go this way to deal with the British and American invasion. Half of them have to go this way to deal with the Russian invasion, or they attacked Russia. So they were on the offensive here, thinking that they would be able to go through this a lot easier. They underestimated Russia completely. All right. And now you have to split your resources. And this is going to be ultimately what strings Germany out and, weakens them to the point where they can't fight the war anymore. So let's see here. Two-front war. Crucial fighting in Europe on the Eastern Front, Germany versus Soviet Union. 3 million Germans are part of the initial siege in 1941. By 1942, they're trying to launch a siege of Stalingrad, which is a modern-day St. Petersburg, which is a catastrophic mistake because the Soviets are going to win this siege in 1943, and it's a turning point in the European war. Now, let's look at Stalingrad. Where am I? Okay. St. Petersburg is right here. So they are going to come up through here and attack St. Petersburg. Besides Moscow, St. Petersburg is the #1 city in Russia, and it's the most European of cities because it is connected to the rest of Europe. So this is provincial Russia out here. Not many people, lots of territory, not very easy to conquer. If you get this and you get this and you get this area, this is where most of the Russians lived. You would be able to take the entire country. So they're going to launch a siege against St. Petersburg. I think something like 1 million civilians or 2 million civilians in St. Petersburg actually died of starvation during this war because Hitler's forces are going to circle around this city and cut off the supply lines, and food is going to run out. All right. So U.S. had just resupplied the Soviets. 1.2 million Russians and 800,000 Germans are going to die in this war. Now, just to put that into perspective, in this battle, 420,000 Americans are going to die in the entire war. 800,000 Germans are going to die just in this one siege of Stalingrad. All right. Now, the Germans are left standing in retreat back towards Germany. And now the Soviets are on an east to west march going in this direction. Okay. Pretty soon after D-Day, the Americans and the British are going to be on a west to east march this way, and Germany is going to start to fold one town at a time. Okay. Let's see. So let's look at the death count here. Now we're talking about 75 to 80 million people dying from, let's say, 1936 to 1945 in that 9 years. That's 3% of the world population. Millions of Poles, at least they were decimated. All right, they're a new country and they're taken by Germany and by Russia, and a lot of the fighting, the Jewish population there is literally completely wiped out. At least 20 million Russians, probably many more. They had very tough ways of counting back then. America could count their people a lot better than a country like Russia could. Many more, not just soldiers, starvation, disease, and massacres. And that's important to remember. This 75 to 80 million is not just about military deaths. There are also civilians that died in the result of military engagement, but there's also civilians died in the form of genocide and discriminatory actions of violence from a country to an ethnic group or a group of people. So we've all heard of Hitler's final solution. Remember, he wanted a pure Aryan Germanic empire where everybody else that was less white and less, blonde haired, blue eyed was thought of as subhuman and different than them and less. All right. So the Jews were a scapegoating group. He blamed a lot of Germany's problems on them. They wielded power in a society where they had a minority share of the population. And they also had ties to communism, according to Hitler. So that was the basis for their scapegoating and genocide of them. They also went after other peoples, Slavic people, gypsies, homosexuals, and of course, above all, the Jews. 1945, 6 million Jewish men, women, children, and were dead in the Nazi death camps, which they called the Holocaust, the culmination of the Nazi belief that Germans constituted the master race destined to rule the world. All right, so we're going to end there today. I am going to put up on the Google Classroom 2 different clips. One will be the Pearl Harbor attack scene from the movie Pearl Harbor, and the second one will be this Band of Brothers concentration camp scene. I think the Pearl Harbor one's about 16 minutes, and the Band of Brothers one is about 10 or 12 minutes. I suggest that you watch them both. They're both from modern renditions of these events, and they're both very powerful. You may have seen them before. But it really kind of puts what happened and the history of it into picture and into, a visual stimulus, if you will. So I hope you're all doing well, and I will see you guys very soon. Take care.